Hey everybody, my name is Colin Smith and I'm the founder of PhotoshopCAFE.com, which is one of the leading learning resources for Photoshop. Today we are going to create a movie poster and we're going to be using the Ultimate Universe Creator. We're going to be using Adobe Photoshop, so why don't we get started right now. So I have it here where I put it on my machine. The very first thing I want to do before I do anything is install the brushes. So if you go under the Ultimate Universe Creator and then we go down under brushes, you'll see there's a set of brushes there. To install inside of Photoshop, it's really easy. All you do is double click the brush. I'm going to choose the application here and we're going to choose Adobe Photoshop. Hit open and the brushes should now be installed. So let's have a look in the brushes panel in Photoshop and we can see down here, there they are. And these are our brushes. Now, if I want to view these brushes a little bit differently, I can. I'm just going to simply click up here and I'm going to take away the name. So I just want to look at the brushes and we can slide there and make those a little bit bigger. Now, this is in Photoshop 2020 or newer. If you're using an earlier version of Photoshop, you'll just find it there inside the brushes panel. So now we can kind of see these quite clearly. Now, in order to find the assets, I'm just opening them here inside of Adobe Bridge. Now we can go into each one of these panels if we want. These are the folders with the different elements. So for example, we've got planets. You can see there's the PSDs where we can just drag them out of there into our document, or they're here in pings. Now I'm just going to show you a little trick so you can see everything inside all the folders all at once. Is we're going to choose the Ultimate Universe Creator here, and see this little arrow? Click on this arrow and choose all items from subfolders. And now what's going to happen is Bridge is just going to load up all the images. So we're just going to let it go ahead and do that. Why don't we go into Photoshop and create our document? So we're going to start from scratch. So we're going to choose File, New. And here's our new dialog box. And what I want to do is I'm just going to go in and why don't we create something like, so let's just choose print here. And under print, why don't we just set something, let's change this to pixels. And why don't we do something 3000 pixels in height. And we'll make it 2100 pixels in width. Now, of course, you can choose whatever aspect ratio and size you want, but this should work nicely. And we're going to set the background to black. And just click OK. And this creates our blank document. So we're going to create our movie poster within this space right now. So what we want to do, first of all, is we want to build the background before we do anything. So let's just click on the Move tool, because this is the tool we're going to be using to rearrange things. And I'm just going to hit the Command Tab. Now, you might have noticed I'm working on Mac. This will work the same if you're on Windows or Mac. Just remember the keyboard shortcuts are different, and I'll call those out. So what we're looking for is a nice background. We're going to build this background, and I feel like I want to have a little bit of a planet. So I'm just going to scroll down here, and there's some here of the Earth. So let's have a look at the different Earth ones. And the one I want to use is this one here. You can see it's got some nice lights and stuff like that. So to add it, all I got to do is just drag it from Bridge into Photoshop, and it'll appear. Now you could have these in your library as well, or however you like to work. So I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to drag it out. Now, if it changes shape, hold down the Shift key. And that will constrain it. And what we're going to do, maybe make it just a little bit bigger. And so we're going to kind of set this as our backdrop. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to hit Enter. All right, great. Now we want something to kind of counterbalance this. In fact, I'm just going to drag it down a little bit. There we go. So let's go back into Bridge. And I want to use one of the planets. So there's a bunch of planets in here. And of course, the one I'm going to use is Saturn, because we all love Saturn. So you'll see there's 3 different versions of it. There's one here with a shadow. There's one here with side lit. And then there's one here that's flat lit. I'm going to grab the one with the shadow. And I'm just going to drag this into Photoshop. And I just want to rotate it. So grab that corner there. As you move outside, notice you get the arrow. And now we can rotate it to a nice angle. And I'm just going to drag it into position. So I think this should really be nice. It should attract some attention. Looks nice, and I'm just going to hit enter. Great. Now notice you can kind of see the shadow there. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the blending mode to make it just kind of blend in a little, because you can kind of see the stars and it's showing there. So we're going to change this blending mode. We're going to go under there, click on normal, and I'm just going to scroll down to lighten or screen. Either of those two will get you a pretty good result. So let's click on lighten. And what we want to do now is we just want to put something up on the top left there just to kind of balance it out a little. So let's go back. And one of the things I like is some of these nebula, and we've got this one here. This is called a space butterfly. I kind of like the way this looks. Now, of course, you can open up the PSDs of these as well, so you can see them all, and you can drag the elements out of the PSDs if you prefer to work that way. In my case, I'm just going to drag this out here. And this is looking good. Notice we don't have to cut it out or anything, which is really nice. I'm just going to scale it down, holding down the shift key to constrain it. Let's drag it up into the corner here. Maybe make it a little bit smaller because I really want Saturn to be the focus here, not this nebula. And hit enter to apply. All right, we're getting pretty close to what we want to do. Now, what I want to do though is I want to make these just kind of blend together, because notice I've got all kinds of different colors, and the colors are nice, but I want to simplify the color a little bit so our subject can pop when we put that in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these, and I'm going to unlock the background just by clicking that padlock, hold the shift key, select them all, and I just want to put these into a group. So hit Control G, and we're going to call this background. This just helps us organize things a little bit better. And also at the top of the background here, I'm going to choose the top layer, because now I want to apply an adjustment that's going to affect all of these layers. But because I put it inside this group, it's only going to affect the layers in this group. So let's go down to the adjustment layer, and we're going to choose hue saturation. So let's choose our hue saturation. Notice it's at the top now. It's not doing anything yet, but what we want to do is I just want to make this a nice strong blue. So let's click Colorize. Notice when we click Colorize, we see the color is applied, so it's all uniform. Just kind of ties everything together. Let's change the color, so we're going to slide hue until we get a nice shade of blue. Okay, we're kind of in here somewhere. But notice it's a little faded. Let's add some saturation. So turn the saturation up. There, now the blue's really popping. We're just kind of looking for a nice modern dark blue color. You'll see this in a lot of sci-fi posters. They're using this kind of color right now. So let's go right there. I think that's looking quite nice. Great. Now we've got the earth here and it's kind of blending into everything else. I do want to kind of create a little separation and do some things with it. So let's create another layer. We're going to create a new layer. And I want to put some clouds, but we want to do particle clouds here. And now this is where we're going to use a brush. So let's grab our brush. And with the brush selected, we're going to go up to our brushes. And we turn that down, we can see all the brushes. So we've got some different clouds and different things we could paint, but I know this is what I want here, is a kind of a nebula. And you can see the size of it's 3744, so it's actually going to be quite big. So we might have to scale this down a little bit, but let's just click there. And why don't we just click on foreground color, because I want to change the color of this brush. I want to give it a bluish kind of a hue, but just a little bit, not too much. See how we got just a little bit of blue in there? Click OK. Because for these types of situations when you're painting with a brush, a little bit of color goes a long, long way. All right, I want to make this a little smaller. So I'm going to hit the left bracket key. As I tap the left bracket key, you can see the brush overlay is getting smaller. That's a pretty good size. All right, so we're on that new layer. Notice that. Let's just see how it looks. So we're just going to make sure our opacity is turned all the way up to 100. And we've got our brush selected. We've got a little bit of blue in the foreground. Let's just click once to apply it. Not quite what I want. Okay, let's hit undo. So why don't we increase this flow? Let's turn this flow all the way up to 100 as well. And now we're going to click once, and there we go. That's looking a lot better. Now I want to add a second bit. So maybe I'm going to put a little bit more color in here. So let me just click on there, and we're going to just switch it a little bit and add just a touch more color, click OK. Now I want this brush to be more to the left. So if you hit the arrow keys on your keyboards in Photoshop 2020 or newer, now you can rotate the brush and you can see that. So that's looking pretty good. Tap to apply it and look at that. Now we've created this nice kind of nebulous kind of a cloud, but it's a particle cloud. It looks quite nice. Now, if you want this to blend in with the other colors, just drag that underneath the hue saturation and you can see how now that kind of affects it and the colors are blending together. So that's not bad, but I would like to see a little bit of the orange maybe, because blue and orange are fantastic complementary colors. They work really well together. And I'd like to see some of these cities lit up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the adjustment layer. And remember, this is the hue saturation layer we applied, which gives it the color. And I want to paint it away. So the layer mask, when it's white, then it shows whatever it's attached to. Just think of it as a light. A white light is going to show everything. If you want to hide it, then dark. Imagine black night, you can't see anything. So that's why we want to grab black, and we're going to grab our brush. Now let's grab a regular brush here. And I think something just like these soft edge brushes, you'll see them at the very top of the brushes panel. We've got these brushes here. That's pretty good. I'm just going to click away. And if you want to change the size of it, left bracket key makes it smaller, right bracket key makes it bigger. All right, so we've got this nice big brush with black as the foreground on this layer mask. Now when we paint, notice what happens. Just paints it away in the areas that we're painting. And notice now we can see we've got a little bit of this color kind of blending in with the blue in the sky. So we've got some nice complementary colors going on here. I feel like this orange should be a little bit more though. So let's go down to the Earth horizon there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give this an adjustment layer. So let's go to the adjustment layers, click on the adjustment layer, and you'll see there's several different types of adjustments. In this case, we're going to use vibrance. I'm going to turn on the vibrance adjustment, and I want to punch up the vibrance. Notice as I do that, you can see these oranges are getting more intense. You could even play around with saturation too if you wanted. That's looking pretty good. Now here's a little tip. Because there's only a black layer underneath, this adjustment layer doesn't really matter too much. But if you want to apply an adjustment layer just to the layer directly underneath it, if you hold down the Alt or the Option key, you'll see that little arrow when you go between the two, click. And see this little arrow here? This means it's now clipped to this layer and it's only going to affect this layer and no other layers. That's good. All right, so composition-wise, it's starting to look quite nice. We've got a nice background. Now we need to bring in our hero. So let's do that right now. Let's go back to our Ultimate Universe Builder, and we've got some astronauts in here. So let's go down and find the astronauts. I'm just kind of scrolling up. Here we go. We've got 3 different astronauts. We have this one, that one, and a standing one. I like this one. The floating astronaut looks pretty good. So why don't we drag that astronaut into our picture? There we go. Great. And now I want to resize it because it's a little too big. So I'm going to hold down that Shift key and we're going to resize. And we want it to be the main part of the photo or the main part of the composition. So make it quite large, but not so large it's overbearing everything else. I think there, or maybe just a little bit smaller. And we're just going to hit Enter to apply. Now notice he's underneath our particles. And you can see that there. So what we want to do is just drag this all the way to the top. And you'll see even above our group, see how that little line just appears above it? Release, and now it's going to be on the layer above. Hit that little arrow there and that will collapse the group. So now we've got a background and we've got an astronaut floating above. So let's just position him how we want him, or her. And what we're going to do now is we want to change the color, because right now it's cool, but the color's not really matching what we've going on in the picture. Right now we've got some orange and we've got some blue. So I'm thinking it'd be really nice to add some blue into the shadows and some orange into the highlights. So why don't we do that right now? So what we're going to do is go with the astronaut layer selected. Let's click our adjustment layer and let's go back to our hue saturation. Now let's give it a blue hue. So we're going to click on the colorize. So that colorizes everything. Remember what I told you about the adjustment layer? How an adjustment layer is going to affect everything underneath it unless we clip it. And if you remember, I told you to click Alt or Option and click here. Now there's a second way to do that. The Properties panel also has this icon. If we click on this icon, that will do exactly the same thing as Option clicking there. And we can see, okay, now it's just applying to the astronaut. Great. Okay, let's give it a bit more saturation. And let's adjust the blue so it's more in line with the rest of the blue in the image. Great. Now you could darken it if you wanted, or you could lighten it. Why don't we darken it just a little bit? Not too much. Okay, so what we want to do now is we really want this blue to be focused in the shadow areas and not in our highlight areas. So the way we can fix this without having to make selections is to use Blend If. So with this layer selected, go down under Effects. This is where you would apply your different adjustments here. These are your layer styles. So choose Blending Options at the very top. And this is our Advanced Blending. And under our Advanced Blending, we now have the option to roll this off the shadows or the highlights. So we want to keep it in the shadows, but we don't want it in the highlights. So let's drag this across. Notice as I do, it starts to disappear from the highlights in the image. Okay, it's looking good, but it's a little posterized. We like to soften those transitions. And we can do that by going up to the arrow, and we want to split this arrow. So if we hold down Alt or Option, we can click on one side and drag it out. And notice now we can split that arrow and see how we can just change these transitions so they're a little smoother. And as we push this more to the left, you notice it's just going more into the shadows. As we go to the right, it's filling in more of the midtones as well. So we just really kind of want that in the shadows. So let's go to about there. And that feels pretty good. I'm going to click OK. So let's have a look at what's happened. Let's hide that layer. There he is. And there it is now with the blue. Now, if you wanted to increase that intensity of that blue, just select that adjustment. And of course, we can increase that saturation. Notice you still have control, but now it's just hitting that shadow area because of that advanced blending that we've used. One of the things, though, I've noticed is if you go here, there's not much color in here, but there is a little bit there in the flag. So why don't we go click on there, and I'm going to grab the mask, and we're just going to paint there to bring back that red. So let's grab a brush, and we're going to paint with black. Remember, black hides that layer. Left bracket key will make the brush smaller. And just quickly paint over there, and that allows that red to come through. Great. All right. Now what we want to do is we want to hit these highlights and give them a little bit of that orangey color. So let's create another layer above, another adjustment layer just like before, hue saturation. We're going to clip it, Alt or Option click, and remember you could also just choose this icon. We'll do the same thing. And for the hue this time, we want to give it a different color. So let's click Colorize. Let's pull that saturation up. Right now it's red. Let's make it more into the oranges. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Now focus in the highlight areas, because this is where we're really going to have it go when we're done. So just kind of play around until you like how it looks in those highlight areas. I think that looks good. Now what we want to do is we want to hide it from the shadow areas and just show the highlights. Kind of the opposite of what we did with the previous layer. So let's go down under the effects, choose blending options once again, and we're going to go back into advanced blending. Now remember before we pushed the whites over so it was only in the shadows? In this case we want to keep it in the whites and we want to take it away from the shadows. So why don't we drag the shadows across, and as we do, you see how it starts to take it away from the shadow area. Now that transition's hard. If you remember what we did last time to soften the transition, Alt or Option and split that arrow And now we can create a softer transition between the two. And see what we're doing there. We're just kind of blending that in a little bit. There we go. So click OK. So now we can see we've got a little bit of orange in the highlights. We've got a little bit of blue in the shadows. I feel like there's a little too much orange. And the nice thing about working with these adjustment layers is that we can just go in and adjust the opacity here in the layers panel. So let's decrease the opacity and just roll it in a little bit. So there we go. We're just giving a little touch of that orange there. That looks much nicer. So if we look at this before, looks like it's just kind of dropped in there. And now we can see the colors are starting to match a little bit. All right, great. Next step we want to do is we want to do some light. And this is really going to make it kind of pull it together. Because right now we've got a background, we've got a foreground. We need something in there that's just going to kind of bring this together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another brush. Let me just select all these layers first though. I'm just going to click underneath that astronaut and hit Control J or Command. We're going to hit Control or Command G for group. And we'll call this Astro. All right, so we've got everything there in one place. All right, let's open Astronaut layer and I'm gonna select it. I wanna create a layer underneath. So instead of just creating the new layer, if you hold down Control, and that would be Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and click, it'll create a layer underneath. Perfect, that's what we want. All right, so what we wanna do now is we wanna create a light flare here. And using this builder here, it's actually quite easy because it's just there as a brush. So let's grab that brush tool. Go down to the brushes and you'll see we've got nebulas, we've got shooting stars. We'll use one of those in a second. But we've also got these cool flares, these light flares. So why don't we grab this one here? No, why don't we use both? We'll start with this one. And what I'm going to do is I want to apply this where it's going the other direction. So if you remember, if you hit the arrow keys like that, you can rotate. If you want to rotate faster, hold Shift and then tap the arrow keys and it'll go much faster. So I want this light to be kind of coming out from here and shooting off to the left. The brush is a little big, so let's make it smaller, tapping the left bracket key. And I want this light flare to come from behind him around about just under his arm. Let's make sure we start with white. So I'm clicking that layer, the foreground layer, and we're going to change it to white. Remember, we're working on the layer directly underneath our astronaut. And we're right there, and we're going to tap once to apply. And look at that, we've got this beautiful flare. Now choose the Move tool, and we can move it around if we wanted. Be a little wary when you're moving these flares though, because sometimes if they get too close to the edge, you'll see an edge appearing. In this case, that's not the case, so we're okay. So try to place them pretty well. So we've got this light coming from behind him kind of shooting off. And that's definitely helping. What I want to do though is I want to create another one on top. So why don't we go ahead and we're going to select the top layer inside there and just click to create a new layer. So now we've got a layer above. So you can see what we've got here. We've got that flare there and that one. Now sometimes you just duplicate that flare and you could just apply it and just use the same one above. But in this case, because I like two of them, I'm going to use a different one. So let's choose the brush, click on the flare, and this time we're going to choose this other one. Let's choose this flare there. Let's close that. And once again, hit the left bracket key to make this smaller. The arrow keys to rotate it. Add the Shift key to speed that up. Great. And I'm just using that arrow key right now to get about the same angle. I'm going to go a little smaller. So let's just hit that a couple more times. And I'm just going to tap that right where it was. And so notice now with the two of them, we've got one behind and one above, but see how it just really makes it look like there's some light there behind him and it's just kind of blending through, or, you know, a little bit more realistic. You might want to adjust the top opacity here of this top flare maybe, so it's not quite so strong. So we got, you know, kind of coming through, but we don't want to go all the way. That's kind of nice. And see how it just kind of starts to bring it, this area here, you've got a background, you've got a foreground, and this just kind of brings the two together. Now I feel like If we wanted to adjust the colors, we could. Let's go down here a little bit. And we're going to open up the background. And let's have a look at our, just clicking on our hue saturation. I like it, but let's just play with it just a touch. There, I feel like if I move that a little bit to the left and just lighten that blue a little, I just like the way it's working. See how these particles just are working a little bit better with the astronaut, and I feel like it's kind of being brought together. Great. All right. There's a couple more things that we can do in here to just kind of finish it off. One of them is, why don't we put a title? So let's go to the very top here, and then we're going to grab our type tool. Now you don't need to create a new layer, because once you start applying the type tool, it will create its own layer. Just make sure you're at the very top, and it will go on the top. So what we're going to do is just click with the type tool, and then let's type in space between. So this will be the name of our movie. And why don't we make our size a little bit bigger? But before we do, let's just use the move tool, and we're just going to kind of drag that in the middle. And I'm going to drag it above just so that the text is on its own layer. And let's collapse astronaut in the background. Just keep things nice and organized. Makes it easier to work. All right, we want to make this bigger. So let's grab the type tool. And I'm just triple clicking, and that will select everything. And let's make the size bigger. All right, maybe we want to have a look at the fonts too. So right now we've got that font selected. Let's click and notice the fonts will appear, and we can roll down looking at different types of fonts that we have. So we've got some nice fonts here. Maybe I'm going to go with something like, what do we got here? I like that one. So we're going to use Helvetica New Light. Of course, choose the font you want. Now there's a couple of things we want to do. Let's open up our panel here. This is our type panel. And one of the things I like to do is increase the space between the letters. So this is where we can do that there. That's our tracking. And I'm just dragging that a little wider. Let me choose the move tool and drag that over. And see how increasing that space really does a lot. It does a couple of things. Makes it more readable from a distance. If you ever look at a street sign, you'll see that this is spaced very wide. And the other thing is, it gives a nice modern, clean feel. So we could put this wherever we wanted. Why don't we put it down here? And notice as I'm moving it, these smart guides show me that it's centered. That's that vertical line. I'm just going to release. All right. I feel like just one more component I want to add on here, just to give it that little zing, that little sparkle, So why don't we do that? We're going to create a new layer, and I'm going to grab my brush. I want to add a comment here. Kind of a Steven Spielberg kind of homage here. So let's do that, or a nod to Steven Spielberg. So let's grab this, and let's just close that down. I want to rotate a little bit, so I'm just going to hit that little arrow key there. Let's go this way. And if you want to make it smaller, remember the left bracket key. So on this new layer, all we're going to do is just tap once to apply that comment. It's looking nice. And because it's on its own layer, we can easily move it around. So I'm just kind of finding a position I like. Where do you guys like it? We could even have it going slightly into the text there if you wanted. There's always an interesting thing. Or going between the text. Let me just pull it up to about there. All right. And there we go. Now there's one other step that I like to do sometimes when I'm happy with my composition. And I'll show you what that is. What I like to do sometimes, I'm going to hide this layer with the text, and I want to create a layer with all the layers on it without flattening it. So I'm just holding down the Shift key. Notice I'm on the top layer. All the layers are selected. Now I'm going to hold down Shift, Option, Command. That's Shift, Alt, Control on Windows, and E. And then what that'll do is it'll create a merged layer on top. So notice now it didn't flatten these, but everything is on top. So let's grab that type layer, drag it above, turn it on, and now we can do different things with this. So I'm going to go into Camera Raw and just give it a little final touch on this layer here. So let's go into here. We're going to choose Filter. We're going to go to Camera Raw Filter. Now everything will show except for the text, because of course that was on its own layer. And let's play around with this a little bit. So I'm going to recover the highlights just a little bit. Open up the shadows a bit. And maybe even just touch the exposure. And see how it's looking nice and everything's moving together. We could try changing the color temperature. We could warm it up. We could cool it down. See that? You've got all that control. Maybe we're just going to slightly cool it. Give it a touch of vibrance to make those colors pop a little more. Maybe even go in here and just touch on the texture. Not too much, but just a little bit. And we can kind of see, you know, hey, this is kind of doing some interesting things here. I don't know if I like that highlight there so much. Let's just play around with that. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to take the blacks and I'm going to push those to the left to really make sure those are nice and dark. And maybe push the whites up. So we're getting more contrast now. Look at this. See how now it's very, very contrasty. And once you've made the adjustments, click OK. Now here's the nice thing about putting them on these layers. You're not committed. So if we look at, there's the image before, and there it is after. You know what? I like the after. I like what's happened in Camera Raw. So I think that looks pretty good. And I think we would call that a day. Okay, so let's review what we did quickly. So we used the Ultimate Universe Builder. And if you guys want to grab it, there's links underneath or somewhere where you can access it. And what we did essentially is we built our background. So that's kind of our plate. So we built that plate with the planet. We dropped the planet in and we dropped in, you know, the Earth crust there. And then we kind of took the brush and then built that particle area, which was just kind of blending the two together, you know, between the seam, because you want to kind of make everything feel like one seamless image. And then once we'd done that, then we brought in our astronaut, which is the hero or the center of attention there. And then we worked on the colors to make sure the colors would match by adding those different adjustments. And then we used Blend, otherwise known as advanced blending, to just hit the blue in the shadows, hit the yellows in the highlights. Then we just did the finishing touches where we grabbed our brush, we added that comment, we added a little bit of type there to make it into a movie poster. And then one of my favorite moves I like to do at the very end, hide the text, merge all the images together into one layer, go into Camera Raw, make those tweaks. And the nice thing about making those tweaks in Camera Raw, because you're moving everything together, it really just brings the composite, because if you're lightening one element, you're lightening another element. Everything you're applying it to all the elements together. It just kind of blends them or smudges them together so they don't feel like they're separate elements that were brought into an image. And then finally we brought back our type. And that's it. So I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial. Thanks, I'm Colin Smith.